serving Youngstown, Akron, and you. We're channels 45 and 49.
Have you got one of these? You know how to use it? Want to learn how to use it better? Think it's just for home movies? There's enough consumer video equipment available right now for you to start your own television station. A documentary usually contains factual material and has an identifiable, clear social purpose. As well, documentaries tend to deal with real people in real situations. But there are all different kinds of documentary. They range from, say, news, which you see every evening. That's a person being interviewed on camera with cutaways that illustrate what they're saying. Now, the cutaways aren't merely there for illustration. Cutaways are a powerful technique that let you shorten and rearrange interviews. We'll get into that. More elaborate documentaries might use music and a creatively written script, computer animation, and even actors that can recreate events. Now, the scope of your documentary and the imagination you can bring to it are unlimited. All you need to know are the basics of story structure, and then, of course, the technical basics of how to put a video together. To involve and motivate your audience is also going to require a special understanding of human emotion and human complexities. Just simply getting raw information across doesn't always work. You'll need to muster up as much creativity and sensitivity as you can. Nowadays, the camcorders are getting so advanced, we're becoming accustomed to seeing them on network news. There was the video from Tiananmen Square and the Oakland Bay bridge collapse during the earthquake, as well as that little high-tech war that we had in the Gulf. One family even made a sail around the world video that aired on TV. And more, news crews are being equipped with consumer camcorders. On the surface, that's probably because they're lighter, they run longer on batteries, they're easier to set up and less imposing than a broadcast camera. But there's another reason, too. In a touchy news situation, if a consumer camcorder gets damaged or has to be abandoned, it's less of a financial burden. Now, you might want to start a documentary that will help your community in some great way. That's okay. But you could also start a little simpler. How about a biographical documentary? You know, an elderly person in your family reminiscing about their lives. And you can really pep this up with snapshots from the family photo album. Not only is it a perfect beginner's exercise in documentary making, but you'll also be making a video that will be appreciated in your family for generations to come. Even though different countries use different video standards, machines are appearing that will allow you to play or copy tapes of any standard. Great expense, the next portion of our program is coming to you from the deep, dark, and I might add, expensive jungle. Everybody likes watching animals on television, and everybody likes photographing animals. But to save you a little frustration, there's some things you should know about those professional nature shows. Often their beautiful close-ups of animals are taken with animals that are specially trained or have been raised to have no fear of humans. Either that, or there are miles and miles or hours and hours of tape or film on that old cutting room floor. So for that reason, I've decided that I'm going to edit what I do here today. And I've also outfitted the camera with the big lens, the one that zooms way into an extreme telephoto. That way I might be able to spy on some of the animals without making them aware of my presence. So on with the great, deep, dark, and I might add, expensive jungle shoot. Well, actually, this is the Metro Toronto Zoo, and there's beautiful, adequate light everywhere for photography. And as far as being expensive, the admission costs less than the price of the blank tape in the camera. You could make a specific nature documentary on a section of wildlife that interests you. Careful research before shooting can add to a more informative video. you can add maps, graphics, and other visuals depicting the geographic location. If you want, you can edit later and add narration, music, and wild sound. Find out when the animals are most active to photograph. It's generally in the early morning or at feeding time. Normally, when I'm free to shoot wherever I want, I wouldn't use a tripod, but in this case, I've got a barrier between me and the animals, and I'm going to have to use that telephoto lens, and there's really no way to effectively hand-hold a tight shot. So it's good to have as sturdy and as smooth a tripod as you can find. Normally, this is about the most boring thing you could possibly do. I'm shooting a sign with over 100 words in it that barely fits on the screen and is barely readable. I don't intend to use it in my video. I'm just a good documentarian, and I may want to read this information later. When photographing animals, it's a good idea to try to make them appear in a natural setting. Also, get lots of different kinds of close-ups that identify them, like the trunk, or trunk and mouth, their eyes, gigantic ears. Ears, that reminds me, we're not just shooting pictures, but recording sounds as well. Good sounds make the picture more interesting. Sometimes we ignore the picture and just record the sound to add later in the editing stage. It's called wild sound. Nothing to do with wild animals. There's a further bonus to being way zoomed in on a long lens. At those settings, the lenses have much more critical focus. And in a case like this where I'm shooting through a wire fence, I can use that critical focus to just make those wires disappear. As I zoom and keep focus on the lion, the cage disappears. Going to the zoo is a lot cheaper than going to Africa. For our demonstration documentary, we've chosen an environmental theme. The story is about a river's ecological destruction. Try to get shots that can tell the story visually. They're often more powerful than words. The type of crew for a documentary can vary depending on the budget and logistics. Today, there are only 3 of us, but you could have more. In this scene, we're interviewing Aird Lewis, a noted environmentalist. We're just about to begin, and lo and behold, an loud lawnmower thing prevents us from recording our first shot. Well, this is just one of the many problems you can encounter when shooting on location. Diplomacy goes a long way. You could simply say, we'll just take a couple of minutes. It actually always takes a little longer. Worry about introductions or anything.
Yeah,
we'll handle all that with editing. Yeah. Okay. You guys ready? And you're rolling? Yeah. All right. Try to avoid questions that result in a yes or no answer. Is the river polluted? Yes. Instead, ask why or how it's polluted. Remember 5 W's. Who, what, when, where, and why. Try using several angles or different locations to make the interview more interesting.
Just look around here.
Add cutaways to give a better understanding and to give more meaning to what the person's saying.
On the roadway, and obviously the big highway and the major intersections have come off it, plus all the building, the heavy building that's gone.
Cutaways are also useful to hide jump cuts when you edit the on-camera person's speech.
Hard surfaces. Rainwater runs off into the river, picking up all the rubbish, all the salts, all the oils. So that's the physical problem.
You have to pay careful attention to what the person is saying. Is there a better way to say it? Did they cover everything? Make sure they haven't gone off topic. Repeating the interview several times until you have it right is pretty standard. Some people are good in the first take and some need a little coaching. It takes a certain skill to know when you have the best take.
Aird, how would you describe the main goals of your group?
After the interview's been completed, our next task is to get a reporter to re-ask the questions so that we can use them later when editing.
And what exactly would you say are the main problems with the river?
Okay, and now just to protect ourselves, I hate this, I hate it, I'm sorry, but just some watching them. Then we do reaction shots, like nodding the head. Reaction shots can act as a cutaway or a break in the monotony of a long-winded interview. The reporter must facially show us how they feel and how they understand what their subject is saying. Do they agree? Is the subject saying something that's a bit exaggerated? How the reporter visually reacts can set the tone and interpretation of the interview.
4 years ago. We have the physical work, but we can't do it because the political people can't get their act together. And this has been the case for about 10 years. And I guess you could say beneath the political reality, you've got...
There are different styles and ways to shoot a documentary. Sometimes having the camera on a tripod appears contrived, doesn't feel real. Being handheld, along with some movement, gives a more fluid feel and helps involve the audience.
Okay, so Aaron, as concerned citizens, how would you recommend that we actually...
This is what it looks like.
So now that we're aware of this problem, what can we actually do to help as concerned citizens?
Well, we have to go to our political masters and ask them to get their act together.
Designing the look and feel of a documentary can be very interesting, but remember, the content should be the most interesting thing. You can shoot cutaways later, after the interview, because you're now more familiar with the content. Cutaways can be assembled together to make a montage where you could put music or add voice-over narration to complement or oppose the viewpoint. Getting ready for a more in-depth documentary will involve a lot of planning, and on two levels. The first level is your story, the content. It's the most important thing. It doesn't matter how many whiz-bang other things you have, fancy cameras, expensive lighting kit. The content has to be your main focus. So you'll need to do a lot of research because you have to be almost an expert on the subject yourself, even before you go to talk to experts. That's so you know what to ask them. And you'll know when they're deviating from what you believe. Now, it's tough to script a documentary because you'll be out there shooting and talking to people and seeing things and learning on the go. But it's best to have an outline of the questions you intend to ask and where you intend to go and what days you intend to shoot whatever. You need to have a plan so that you know when you're deviating from the plan. Now, be prepared to be very flexible with your story because you'll often find that everything you've read is out of date by the time you get there live with the experts staring at the riverbank or whatever. Now, on the other hand, there are the pure technicalities. You'll be interviewing people and gathering together large groups of people whose time is valuable. So make sure all your equipment works. Test it in advance. Make sure that everybody knows where they have to be at every moment. And you can even issue sheets of paper telling people the exact address, location, and stuff for the entire week if you wish. Okay, we're ready to free the river. Well, at least we're ready to start editing the documentary entitled Free the River. You notice that we've gone low-tech on this title. It's just on a white piece of paper in front of a camcorder. It's another perfectly acceptable way to do titles. And we're going to we'll jazz it up a little bit in a minute with our effects board that will allow us to process that. Now, I've absolutely everything I need to make this documentary. I have logged all the tapes. I know where all the shots are. I've recorded black on my recording tape, and I've even laid down an opening piece of music that I want to start the whole show with. I've got absolutely everything you can imagine except a clear idea of what the documentary is going to say. See, documentaries evolve. For instance, part of the pictures here were obtained at the public archives. Just go down to the camcorder, talk to them nice, and shoot pictures of, you know, then and now or whatever you want. I had thought that these archival pictures would show my river with people frolicking next to it, swimming in it, having picnics on the banks. But instead, it turns out that as long as photography's existed, in these photos anyway, we've been wrecking the river. All the pictures show is gouging the river banks and industry and junk floating in the water. So my brilliant idea of a montage of then and now has evaporated. I can't do it. It's going to be all now sort of thing, even though I will use the old photos. This means that I now need to put in a piece of narration, I believe, to maybe say how the river was before mankind came to its shores. I'm not sure. So I'm going to let the opening evolve and just see with the music I've picked and the pictures, once I start combining them, what happens. Okay, music's all laid down and the tape's blacked, so find the beginning of it. And here's the fade up of the title. Cut to the seagull. Now dissolve to our first archival picture. Now, what's next? Editing can be fully engrossing. Sometimes you don't know what kind of show you have till you see it. Now, here I'm showing today's garbage juxtaposed with the archival pictures. No need for narration yet. A great man once told me, don't say it if you can show it. There are thousands of decisions to make when you're editing, and to be a good editor requires a great deal of persistence, knowing when to cut, which is the best shot, where the shot is, what kind of music should be used. If you haven't shot enough cutaways, editing can become very difficult. One really good rule is to know when your creative juices have dried up. Then what you need to do is press stop. You know, this is the way a proper edit session should end. It's really great being able to spend as long as you want editing what you're doing, 20 hours if you like. That's because it works better when it's all in your head, no matter how comprehensive you think your notes are or how solid you think your idea is. It's really great to just be able to keep going. But I've lost some perspective now, even though I finished the whole thing. So I'm going to just have a look at it tomorrow. What will happen is, you've heard of saving things in the edit room. I have one final save on this documentary. The way I've done it, there's no narration yet. So I'll be able to look at it and decide where it didn't quite say what I wanted it to say, and I'll be able to stick in a little bit of narration there to kind of prop up the whole story. Because after all, with simple editing, you can't just go and re-edit what you've edited. You'll lose a generation of tape. So it's better to try to keep it buoyed up all the way along. So you've made your documentary. It's there for posterity, sort of. And when it comes to videotape, we have to define prosperity a little different. See, it doesn't matter if you've stored your tape in all the right conditions and really cared for it, but videotape tends to disintegrate every few years. It's different depending on particular dates and brands and batches. But for anything you really want to keep, every few years you should make a protection copy of it and really keep your eye on the original. Our next section is about a family that sailed all around the world and documented their adventure on video.
We're heading due west at the moment. We're about 720 miles south of the equator. The wind for the past couple of days has been around 30 knots, so we're getting pushed along at about 120, 30, 40 miles a day, which is very fast for a 30-foot boat. Normally we do about 100 miles a day.
Paul Howard and Fiona McCall and their 2 children circumnavigated the world in a 30-foot yacht. It took 5 years to visit 29 countries. They crossed the equator 4 times and covered 5 continents by way of the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans. When they began, their son Peter was 4, and his sister Penny was 6. These kids would see the world like no others. Paul and Fiona decided to get a camera and recorder to capture their astonishing trip on video. They sent back video journals of their trip to a broadcast television news show where millions of viewers followed their adventure. By the end of their trip, they published 2 books and shot 20 hours of tape that was turned into a TV 1-hour special documentary.
But Lorca's coming home.
We found them back on dry land. This is a tough question for people who decided to chuck society as we know it. But what made you decide to go on the trip? What was the...
Well, I guess Paul was the sailor, so he had the dream.
Yes, and we'd done a sailing trip before. It was primarily a coastal trip. We were off for a couple of years, came back, had 2 children, wanted to go off. We were already planning this ocean passages, perhaps around the world at the end of the other trip. but we really like the education and the travel. It's stimulating, and it's great. The nice thing about traveling by boat is you always have your home with you. You can cook your own food, you carry things with you. You have your own travel schedule, and yes, you are completely responsible for yourself, but there's a lot of things that you can do. You have that freedom to go where you want and spend whatever time. So you can be 2 days in a place that you might have originally thought you'd be 2 months, and then you might spend 6 months in a place you only thought you'd be there for a week. So it gives you that latitude.
And having your children with you adds an absolutely incredible dimension, because they become, even at 4 and 6, they become your ambassadors to the countries that you're in. People will always relate to people with a family, so that even if you were on an island with people who were perhaps wary of visitors, the children made it okay. And there were many islands where the kids would row ashore before we did, get to know the islanders. They would come back and say, hey, we're invited to the Chiefs for dinner tonight, or whatever it was. And we always knew they were safe.
Their video experience came from a simple hands-on technique.
Video seemed a possibility, even though neither of us had had any video experience before.
No one had in the mid-'80s. I mean, that's the dawn of lightweight battery-operated equipment that was capable of doing this. So,
Of course, the interesting thing is when you start something new like that, and because we had been traveling, we thought everyone did it. I mean, we thought we were such neophytes that we would giggle and kind of look at this camera, but there were a few people on other boats that had videos, and that's really what gave us the idea. And even though this equipment now will look incredibly out of date because it's 2 pieces of equipment, we had seen this Canon equipment on another boat, and the picture seemed really good, so we weren't worried about the fact that it was heavy and it was awkward and all these other things. The picture looked good.
right. Actually, as long as you're showing equipment, I just have to show the bag. These are
handmade by us.
That is a great boating camera bag. I think.
We're getting ready now to sail up to the New Hebrides Islands.
Once they got the hang of it, they decided to sell their tapes to television.
If you've got someone that you're actually filming for, it makes it gives you a reason, another reason, and it gives you deadlines and things. So we had written to CFTO here, and they had said yes, they were interested, and so that you know, in the 3 months after we had the equipment, we had to put a story together and we had to send it off, and we had to do it professionally. We had to provide them with a script. We thought we had to provide them with voiceover. We had to provide them with a story. I mean, we did the whole thing, so it was challenging and interesting.
So when you did all that, did you just record your voiceovers right to the video camera? Just take it to a quiet spot, or?
Well, sitting on the boat, we'd always, after we had our story, we'd do roughly a half an hour that we knew that would be edited down to a minute and a half or 2 minutes. And then at the end of what we thought the footage that would make the story, either Fiona and I would go up to the bow of the boat, the other one of us would be in the camera. I mean, that was always the joke. Whoever was in front of the camera wasn't running it, you know, so you always knew who was filming. But we had a little script, and we'd do a little story talking about it, and so that they could cut whatever of that voice that they wanted to over the other footage.
But though the seas were rough, the winds were behind us, and we were surging along, making about 100 miles a day towards our destination, Vanuatu. That is, until disaster struck us.
This video quality isn't bad, considering it was shot with 1986 equipment. I asked them to tell me some of the highlights of their trip.
I think that some of the really interesting stuff is us living on board the boat at sea, thousands of miles from anywhere. We celebrated birthdays, for instance, on board the boat. So we would always have a birthday cake, and we'd do some kind of ceremony, blowing out the birthday cake, etc.
And people are often curious about what we ate, and so there's shots of cooking bread, catching fish. We caught a lot of fish, cleaning the fish on board the boat.
I guess over and above the aspects where you actually got it broadcasting stuff, it must be a great memory.
Well, you know, it's a few years since we've done it now, and you're seeing that we're having a little bit of difficulty in remembering it, and I'm thinking, yeah, there's a lot of stuff in there that...
About February the 15th, you probably get that tape out.
That's right.
You know, an interesting way to sneak into show business might be with the public service announcement. TV stations will play these so-called PSAs if there's some relevance to the community. The PSAs can be anywhere from 30 seconds to 2 minutes, although you might want to check with your local station first. Here's one we put together.
Hey, do you have some time on your hands?
No, sorry, I don't have the time.
No, I'm just too busy, sorry.
I'm sorry, I just don't have the time. Many organizations need your help, so get involved and volunteer today.
Yes!
As an assignment, make a PSA. You might want to script it or do like we did. Just go out and shoot it and put it together in the edit room with titles. If you're making a public service announcement for a good cause and your ideas are good, you'll be surprised how many people will volunteer their service or facilities for free. There's no harm in asking, is there? I mean, after all they can say is...
Yes!
I guess we don't need to tell you that documentaries can lead to a better understanding of social concerns and problems. But think about this. Television has completely revolutionized the way we see and think about today's world. And the camcorder puts that power in your hands. Some have even suggested that this is one of the great tools of democracy. So what are you sitting there watching me for? Why don't you go out and make a documentary? There's no shortage of stories. The newspapers are full of them. Form a documentary team or join a club or go out and make one on your own. See you at the awards.
Home videos of this videography series are all available on a set of 2 VHS tapes. To order, call 1-800-854-5500. Each tape is almost 2 hours long and costs $40 per tape. Also available for $33, the illustrated 176-page videography book, which expands upon the tapes. Or you may choose the combined package, 2 tapes and the book, for $89. Call 1-800-854-5500 anytime. Pay by credit card, check, or money order.